Welcome, everybody, to this special edition of the Gladden Longevity Podcast, where our aspiration is to help you make 100 the new 30. We do that by addressing four questions. How good can we be? How do we make 100 the new 30? How do we live well beyond 120? And how do we live young for a lifetime? In this podcast, we're going to take a little bit different tact. I brought back a guest. His name is John Lieurance. He's a naturopath, a chiropractic. He runs a clinic in Sarasota, Florida. We had spoken with him before about mitochondrial health, sleep, melatonin, methylene blue, NAD, etc. But in the context of that conversation, we started to push into some things related to really the life energy circle, which of course has to do with mindset and mental health and feeling loved and good relationships, having a sense of purpose, feeling safe, and having joy as a North Star. And then things like having a connection to this universal energetic, if you will, and a higher sense of purpose. And so I brought him back because we never really pushed into that area. But in this conversation, we go deep in that area. And we're going to talk about some interesting things, not only related to the ego, the psyche, the spiritual space, but breathwork, ways to access things, how our psychology is built, how to basically crack through to new levels of understanding, new levels of liberation, and living an unencumbered life. I found it a fascinating conversation. I think you will too. I hope you really enjoy it. Welcome, everybody, to this edition of the Gladden Longevity Podcast. This is really kind of a special edition. We haven't done this before. We're bringing back Dr. John Lieurance, who we did a podcast with, I'm going to say it's a month ago, 6 weeks ago, something like that, and had a really interesting conversation around melatonin, methylene blue, some things he's doing in the regenerative space. He has a chiropractic and a naturopathic background. He's located in Sarasota, Florida, has a clinic there. But in the course of the conversation, and even in his bio that he sent over, there's some interesting directions that he's going with regards to his whole actualizing his life, if you will, that I found really interesting. They're kind of in the, I would call it the psycho-spiritual space, really kind of matches up to our life energy circle, where we talk about all the things that need to come together for somebody to really become unencumbered and to live kind of in this more enlightened space, which we think has just massive impact on people's health and their, psychology is basically the driver here of health in so many regards. So I wanted to invite John back to basically kind of jump into this category of conversation. So John, welcome back.
Thanks, Jeff. I'm happy that you invited me back, especially for the topic it sounds like we're going to embark on. It's near and dear to my heart.
Yeah. So one of the things that you talk about is three legs of a stool is being kind of maybe foundational for you in your own life. And one of them is vitality of body. One is mind mastery. And the other one is a direct experience of God. And we've kind of talked about the vitality of body piece. And of course, mind mastery and direct experience of God loop back into that. So we'll leave that one aside for the moment. But I'd like to talk with you about your concepts related to mind mastery and direct experience of God. We'll take them probably in that order, and then we can exchange some ideas and experiences and things like that as we go along. So,
yeah, sure.
What's your concept in mind mastery piece?
Well, it's really dealing with the ego and this illusion that we're all running around with, that we're actually our thoughts or our degrees are the things that we've done, the relationships that we've had. All these things are just an accumulation of a bunch of bits. And when you separate all the bits apart, there's not really anything there. I remember listening to a Buddha or a Rinpoche lecturing, talking about how if you take a car, there's no real car. And you take all the bits of the car apart and there's really no car. So it's the same thing with the ego. Is we have all these bits of data. They're all thought forms. And they're accumulated into, in science, we call it the default mode network, which is where our sense of identity lies in our mind. And so this forms this ego, which is constantly trying to be the master, right? The ego is a much better servant than master. And it's always kind of getting us thinking there's something we need to do or be in the future or change in the past in order to somehow be whole. And it's a place that you'll never get. You're always only going to be in this now moment. And so it's this.
Yeah, I think, let me just interrupt you for a second. I think it's an interesting point that you make. And I think just to kind of outline that for the audience, I mean, what he's talking about are really several different things. One, I came across a concept that, everything is made up. Nobody's in charge. This came from a guy, Dan Sullivan. Everything is made up. Nobody's in charge, and life isn't fair. That was his concept. And so I kind of focused in on the idea that everything is made up. And in actual fact, our brains are creating what we perceive to be reality. And one of the biggest problems that we have is that people believe that their thoughts are true. Mm-hmm. They believe that the reality that they've created with their thoughts, that that's actually true. And so if anybody's really going to have a breakthrough in terms of their own psychological understanding or spiritual understanding, one of the first things to understand is that this ego basically kind of built off of, I think, kind of an underlying amygdala-driven, fear-driven, sense of lack of safety-driven motif that runs in the background. We're trying to basically solve that lack of safety by getting a degree, getting a job, earning an income, marrying the right people, living in the right neighborhood, buying the right car, doing all these things. And of course, none of it ever satisfies that. So, but we believe all that's to be that's true. We actually identify that, as to your point, as an identity. But it's so important to understand that it's really all made up. And so once you realize it's made up,
the other level to it is that with all of that data, there's a right, wrong, there's a good, bad, and there's the judgment that comes into play. And so often, at least 50% of the time, you're going to be on the side of you're not in alignment with that, right? Which is what reality is. And so oftentimes a lot of masters will talk about just being neutral, the middle way, and observing reality. And we can create things to be a certain way, but it's not in a traditional sense of, like, if you start to talk about prayer, where we're petitioning, if you want to call God, Allah, the divine, the quantum field, the morphogenic field, there's something creating everything. And we are all part of manifesting and creating this reality. And so we have a part in that. And for us to think that we can go in and just say, I want a car, I want this, we're coming from a sense of lack. We want, and there's a judgment where if I don't get it, it's bad. If I do get it, it's good. Whereas a friend of mine studied the original Aramaic. I mean, this is literally the oldest version of the original, the Bible written in its original language, which is Aramaic. And Yeshua, or Jesus, his name wasn't even Jesus. The Greeks called him Jesus, but so his name was Yeshua. And this version of the Bible is written in a way that isn't really reflective of the current Bible, that it's been changed and bastardized and rewritten and so forth, really to support control and fear of masses, right? So like the word sin is an archery term. Literally, they would stand next to the targets, and if you missed, they would yell evil. So evil meant you missed, you're off target. Mm-hmm. And sin means try another shot. You're not bad. You're not going to hell. You're a little bit off, like move a little bit over here and readjust yourself. Mm-hmm. So this whole idea of this, burning in hell for the rest of your life and blah, 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 it's really not meant to be in that spirit, I don't believe. So with regards to prayer, what Yeshua would talk about is to go into gratitude for already receiving it. And you have people like Rhonda Byrne and a number of other people who have come out talking about manifesting things in their lives and creating things, and Wayne Dyer, the power of intention. And all of these people say the same thing, is that if you go into a deep state of gratitude, you can create whatever you want with a state of thank you. And this is telling the universe, because the universe only knows abundance. It doesn't know lack. So when you say, I want a car, all it hears is, hey, I don't have a car. Whereas, oh, I'm so grateful for the car. What is that car going to feel like? And you really get into that. Joe Dispenza does a really good job at some of these manifestation, deep heart meditation, creating, I learned a lot from him. And if I would recommend anybody to attend some of his meditation retreats. Have you?
Yeah, I haven't attended his. I've kind of gone down my own path here, but I haven't attended it, but I've heard his stuff and seen some of his things, and they resonate with me as well. I think, one of the interesting things is that I think when you're on this path to, I'll call it being unencumbered, right? And I'll explain what I mean by that. We all basically grow up. We've been traumatized in some fashion. We end up living in reaction to those traumas. I call that kind of living on tilt, right? Like something happened, so now we got bullied, but something happened. We're on tilt relative to that. This is part of what creates that sense of not being safe. And then out of that, we sort of start to tell ourselves stories about that. Like, well, this happened to me, therefore this is, how I live, and this is how it should be. And so we end up creating an identity basically in reaction to those traumas. And it becomes very, very ingrained in our psyche and in our neural pathways. And I think part of the healing that has to occur is to, number one, unravel the knot. What actually happened? What was the trauma? Who was involved? How was I vulnerable? All these kinds of things. And I think you have to come to grips with that. Then you basically need to heal that trauma, right? So then there's steps that you go through to heal that trauma where you no longer become a victim of whatever it was that was occurring. You actually extract yourself from that, replace things in the narrative or whatever. That's good, but it's still not good enough, because there's another stage, which is really transcendence, which is what I think all the masters are talking about. When you get to a point where you realize, quite honestly, that everything that ever happened to you was for the good. There's nothing bad that ever happened to you. Everything was actually that brought you to this point in the world at this point in time. And so now, to your point, you transition into a place of gratitude for everything. And there is no judgment of something that occurs is either good or bad. It simply is, and you become grateful for it, and you see the opportunity in it as opposed to the threat. And I think that's what I call starting to live an unencumbered life, where you're unencumbered by your past, you're unencumbered by the events of the present, and you're unencumbered because you're not really attached to an outcome in the future, although energetically in that place of gratitude, you can manifest things like, I want to change the glide path of aging for everybody on planet Earth, right? That's my mission. I want Gladden Longevity to be a global company that mission is to change the glide path of aging for every single human being on the planet, right? That's what I want to do. And so that intention draws things to me. People come to me, things show up, and the next thing you know, we're doing this and doing that and doing this. So it's possible to influence your outcome, but it's not from a place of fear. It's from a place of, to your point, a place of gratitude and love, really. And you find that really, I feel like I live in this fabric of what I call love and support. A lot of us wake up every day and it's like, well, I'm going to battle today. It's going to be rough out there. There's people, that are going to try to undermine me or whatever else, or this guy doesn't like me or whoever it is, right? I reject all of that. I think basically I wake up and, my mantra is that I'm 27, that I have access to unlimited resources, that I live in an energetic fabric of love and support, that I'm on a path to enlightenment, and I have unlimited opportunity, and I have a 3,000-year-old mind, which is kind of my definition of where I'm going. It was a 27-year-old body with a 3,000-year-old mind. So it's when you come to life with this, realizing that everything is made up. When you go back and you heal the past and you transcend it, now it's like, okay, now we're unencumbered. Now let's go out and create whatever joy we can in the world. I think this is really a key to unlocking not only our potential, but our gifts, our connection to the spiritual, to the quantum, to God, whatever you want to call it. So that's kind of, in a little bit of a synopsis of kind of my my own
Oh
journey,
yeah,
if
I
you
love
will.
that. It kind of, the word or the phrase that's coming to mind is radical acceptance.
Yeah,
Just whatever happens, if it's, if you run into traffic, you have this idea that you're being protected from an accident that you might have gotten into. There's always a twist that you can put on things. I look at like my illness when I got really sick, and I wish it didn't last, over 10 years. It was pretty miserable, but
sure.
I'm super healthy right now. I have probably the best life I've ever had. Right, right now is just phenomenal. We just had
Yeah.
this epic event last night, Jeff, that just really kind of consummated all the work that I've done up until this point. And it was just, I wish you would have been here. We had
Mm.
a DJ, his name's Pavel.
Okay.
And I met Pavel when Dave Asprey had a event in Orlando a couple of months ago. And he had a couple of DJs. It was 2 different nights. And the second night, Pavel, he does like this guided breath work type of
Okay.
event. And I wasn't able to make it because I was hanging out with his wife. We went and hung out, and because she was over it. She's seen so many things. And I was just fascinated by, her name's Fairy, and she was from Hawaii, and I grew up in Hawaii. And so we just went and hung out at the bar there at the hotel, and we talked, and I missed his event, but there was an event before that, which was Soma breath, which was epic. And I was just like blown away at how amazing I felt with just doing intense breath work and moving my body. And the way that the DJ was able to kind of make suggestions and allow you to kind of just give and receive love and just be in just a beautiful state.
Nice. Was there music when you say DJ? I'm thinking about music. Is there music involved with this? Is that a piece of it as well?
Yeah.
Yeah.
The Soma was very tribal. Last night we had a very talented musician that came in. I'm not remembering his name because it's very long and it was difficult to remember. But he played the didgeridoo, and he was also kind of chanting. So the music was totally live. We had somebody that was on the drums. We had a sound bowl lady, and it blew my mind. It was an Into the Mystic, and we do an Into the Mystic event here. We have an event center, and it's about, I don't know, like 50 or 60 feet by maybe 100 feet. And we have a big, marble Buddha in the front, and it's lit up. I mean, it's just a beautiful space. And we probably had about 30 people there. And he has these wireless over the ear headsets. And so you could really hear everything. And we would lie down, and he took us through a process where we did some breath work, and then we gathered and we did a cacao ceremony. He had me come up and talk a little bit about some of the MitoZen products and how I was using them with breath work. And then he guided us through this hour and a half long, deep breath work. And I mean, I was with God. I had downloads on like just inspiration of like cleaning up some relationships, let's say, that I felt I needed to go back and maybe make some amends, just beautiful things coming through.
Yeah.
And to your point, I think what's so interesting, because the science behind this is what really fascinates me, because in the middle of these experiences, often I'm thinking about the neurology and what's really happening. And your point about fear, we have this drive to avoid feelings of fear, and we avoid fear, and we're seeking pleasure. And so that fear trigger is kind of like guiding us, right? And there's so many thought forms in our unconscious mind that we don't have access to. And there's all these kind of knee-jerk reactions that are controlling us. And it makes it so difficult to navigate, because you get so confused, and then you think you need to do this, you need to change this, you need to blah, 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 blah.
Right. And then you're frustrated when you're doing things. Yeah, you're frustrated when you do those things and it doesn't change, right? Or it changes for a nanosecond when you get the A on your paper or whatever else, but then it's kind of right back. I kind of use lack of safety. as opposed to fear. I think fear is an expression of lack of safety, just like I think anxiety is an expression of lack of safety, even depression. Anger is a sense of lack of safety, right? So for me, it's about this feeling, somehow we have this desire to feel safe.
Mm-hmm.
And when we don't feel safe, it leads to fear, it leads to all these other emotional expressions. So
I like that. I think that that's a great way of looking at things, and it can be a little bit more expansive, looking at things a little differently.
yeah. And one of the things that I've discovered is that, when it comes to giving ourselves unconditional love, because none of us really got, unconditional love growing up as a kid. We may have had loving parents, we may have experienced some loving things, but nobody came through unscathed. Nobody got everything that they needed, right? And nobody on the planet. So eventually you get to the point in my own life where I kind of replaced my mom from that maternal psychological seat and replaced my dad and started to give my little self unconditional love. And that happened over some years, but it really got triggered when my son was born, and I felt unconditional love for another human being for the first time in my life. I had never felt love like that before, ever. And so it was like, well, why can't I feel that way towards myself? So I ended up giving myself unconditional love. But then you get to this point of safety, right? So even with all that, I'm still living on tilt because I don't feel safe, right? And so, and it's the kind of thing that, because it's so ingrained in who I am, other people can pick up on it, but I can't even see it. It's like I'm blinded to it, right?
Yeah.
And so then what I realized is that there's nothing external to us that can ever make us feel safe. So then it's like, okay, well, this is an inside job, just like unconditional love is an inside job. Now making ourselves feel safe is an inside job. Okay, well, how am I going to do that? Well, I just did it from the sense of, okay, I'm going to scoop up little Jeff and make him feel safe, just like I give him love. Yeah. But then it also comes through what we're talking about here, through this spiritual connection to the divine, to the quantum, where it's like, okay, this is, we're here for the duration. And I mean, the whole duration, right? So when you feel connected to that, all of a sudden it's like, oh, I'm safe. No, I'm still safe. I'm still safe. And so when you can live with that sense of safety and unconditional love, it goes a long ways towards, getting you to a point of being unencumbered. So,
yeah. Well, if you have this, if the ego is really alive and well, it doesn't want to die, right? And so there's this idea that eventually we're going to die and that we're no more, and that, we're annihilated, right? So annihilation, we no longer are, is a very scary. Ultimately, I think that all of the safety aspects are that is the final outcome. Like if I don't get my peanut butter and jelly sandwiches as a child, then I'm going to die, right? And that's what kids probably, it's like you can have a conversation with a kid, but there's fear when these things come up, and the parents, whoever's in control, they're the master, right? And so it starts to entrain this idea that if you don't do the right thing, then you won't exist, right? And then there's this, are you worthy, right? Are you lovable? And if you're not worthy and you're not lovable, then that's the consequence, is that there's annihilation, that you no longer are. So it's really at the deepest core, and it's the most difficult to kind of touch into, because ultimately what needs to happen is the individual needs to know, not just have a concept in their mind, but to totally know in their heart that they will never die, right? That the spirit lives on, and that this is just a chapter, right? So this is just a skin bag that you're temporarily occupying. And so everything else is really just thought forms that are giving you a temporary sense of pacification, if you will, because you're going to circle back to it over and over again. And that's where the direct experience of God comes into place, because there's an overlap. We talk about vitality, identity, divinity, right? So, but all of them have, they're all connected. So the identity, if we can disidentify with the ego and we can identify with the spirit, and at the same time we start to realize, and the experience of God, or the quantum field or the divine is a mystical experience. If anybody's had it, it's like you're completely at one. You're in total bliss. You feel nothing but love for everything and everybody.
That's
and
right.
Very expansive.
There is no judgment there either. There is no judgment at that point, which is, I think, really, really important, because you come across people that are quote unquote elevated beings or whatever, but there's so much judgment there. It's like, oh, I'm not sure they're really where they think they are, and I'm not judging them. I'm just encouraging them. It's like, hey, when you're really here, it's love for everybody, right? To your point. So,
yeah. Well, everybody, I think, no matter how much work you've done, there's parts of all of us that vacillate through it, and I think that's a really beneficial way of looking at things, is when the chips are down and maybe you're not, the spiritual being that you felt like you had gotten and you've achieved that, then, sit back and say, parts of me aren't all that spiritual, and parts of me are, right? Instead of taking on that, hey, I haven't learned anything. Look at me. Like I just treated that poor person like absolute crap. And like I've learned no, there's parts of you that maybe you slip back on. And
that's right. We're all a work in progress. I think to accept yourself is one of the key things, right? It's, I'm a child of God, so to speak. And so I'm worthy to be loved and to accept even, the things that I'm still working on, so to speak.
And that's what I've been working on a lot, Jeff, is this shadow work. I'm not sure if you've
I know it very well. Yeah. To me, I call it working on the things that I can't see. Right.
There's a book I've been enjoying called Existential Kink. Have you ever heard of it?
No.
It's really well done. I mean, don't let the name of the book kind of dissuade you, but this lady, I forget her name, she gets into it and she talks about how, we find these things that we don't like, actually, like kind of in a kinky way, we love it. Like in a way, we're very attracted to maybe treating somebody poorly and having that control over them, and you're getting some dopamine hit out of it. Like there's a boost to it, but yet you don't like that about yourself, right? You have this, judgment that's bad. And so it's suppressed and you're unconscious and you don't even realize that you're getting off on it, and it keeps on coming up over and over again. And so working on these things again on the subconscious, and that's why I think breath work, and I was kind of alluding to that, and I think that the talking about the breath work is going to dovetail really nicely into some of the ideas I have on how you can actually work through some of these unconscious thought forms.
I think that's right. I think breath work is really a doorway. It's like a gateway that you can walk through to attain some different levels. I think there is an interesting, for me, as I've been feeling into it, I think there's an interesting thread that kind of links a lot of things together. You're familiar with Joseph Campbell and the hero's journey.
Oh, yeah.
Right. And so when you think about all the movie plots, right, all of the movie plots of people, overcoming, it's either a revenge story, a love story, something that's gone bad, or reclaiming this and trying to get that back, or whatever it is. As I look at, and I ask myself the question, what is it that they're really going for? What is it that they're really going for there? It's not about the thing in the plot. There's something that's unifying in everybody's hero journey that we're going for. And I really think, and I've not shared this with anybody before, but I think it has to do with people wanting to be unencumbered. They don't want to be oppressed. They don't want to be held back. They don't want to be free.
We're seeking
freedom.
Want to be
free. That's right. Yeah. Unencumbered from their past, unencumbered from current circumstances. And so they're fighting to become unencumbered, so to speak. It's kind of the human drama. We want it so badly. Right. We want it so badly.
The masculine energy within all of us, we all have masculine and feminine sides to us. And the masculine wants to be free. The feminine wants to be filled up. Right. And this doesn't necessarily have to be man, woman, because it's like the sun and the moon, it's like you have energies that create duality, right? And you have polarity, I guess is a better word for it. And so that both men and women have this masculine desire for freedom, right? And
This episode of the Gladden Longevity Podcast is brought to you by H2 Molecular Hydrogen in the Gladden Longevity Store.
Yeah, Steve, you've heard us talk about this numerous times on the podcast in terms of the benefits of H2 and hydrogen water. We love it. You know, it's really the best way to balance your entire redox system. So it really protects you from free radical damage. I take it every time I get on a flight to protect me from radiation damage when I'm flying. And I use it to rejuvenate my brain in the afternoon. You know, there's really two kinds of exercise. There's physical exercise, and taking H2 before or after that works great. But also there's mental exercise. And I find that the H2 will bring your brain back when you're tired in the afternoon. So I think it's like the perfect thing for longevity and for performance, quite honestly.
And I talked to you about this, that I found dropping 1 or 2 tablets in a glass of water right before bed. I've seen an overall bump in my deep sleep when I do so. And
fascinating. Yeah.
Yeah. So if you click on the store tab when you visit GladdenLongevityShop.com and use the promo code podcast10, you'll get 10% off your order. And this code isn't only good for our H2 product, but it's also good for all the supplements we carry. So podcast 10 at the GladdenLongevityShop.com.
Yeah, one of the other things that I use it for routinely is when I'm about to go on a mountain bike ride. And I will say this, that if I go on a long mountain bike ride, I will take one prior, I'll take one during, and I'll take one after. And some of the Ironmen that we've worked with have said that when they're doing an Ironman, they'll take it 3 or 4 times throughout the race. And their comment is that it's like taking out the old battery and putting in a new one. It really rejuvenates your body's ability to perform when you're doing more extended athletic activity. So think about that too. You know, if you want to go do a longer hike or whatever else, take it with you.
So GladdenLongevityShop.com, enter podcast 10 for 10% off your order.
H2 molecular hydrogen. It's low-hanging fruit on your quest to make 100 the new 30. I think both men and women do want to be unencumbered. And I also think this about the female side. I think, you know, women basically are the creators in a sense, right? They're the creators of life, so to speak. We're kind of the initiators, if you will, the initiators of activity or whatever else. But in many ways, they're the creators. But I think for entrepreneurs, I think their feminine side is coming out in their creative activity. So I'm not able to create a life, carry a child, deliver a child, bring that into the world, nurture that child the way that a woman can. But we conceptualize ideas. We bring forward companies. We nurture those companies, the people in them. It's in a way, it's kind of a very feminine energy that we bring along with the masculine, and it could be a woman either way. But there's kind of this desire to create, right? I think that's one of our highest callings. So anyway, this male-female thing, I think, does get blended in for each of us. So,
well, it's getting things done. You know, it's that salience, right? It's focused on like a direction and getting something accomplished, right? Where the feminine is chaotic. It's nature. You know, it's not as linear as you know, like
it's
a train going
on
down
nurturing. Yeah, that's right. More focused on nurturing and then allowing it to unfold a little bit, right? So it's a little more chaotic in that sense. Yeah, it's interesting.
Beautiful. I was just going to suggest we kind of circle back to the breathwork because I wanted to kind of speak to some of the neurology behind that I was really experiencing last night.
Okay.
As you know, I think we talked about it on our podcast with the blue spot, the locus coeruleus. That this is the reptilian brain. This is where like our fear sensories are, right? So we don't really have control over it. Like if we're drowning, there's going to be fear, and it's very, very difficult to override that unless you have a super, super developed frontal lobe or you've done just some incredible spiritual work. But you have your CO2 sensors in the locus coeruleus. And when you're doing breath work, so the locus coeruleus is responsible for initiating that norepinephrine dump in the brain, which is that fear. And it's going to drive a lot of behavior. In fact, I would almost say it's at the hub of driving a lot of our behaviors, which you pointed out earlier. And when we do breath work, we're blowing off a lot of CO2. And what this is doing is it's allowing that locus coeruleus to really quiet down, which is what a lot of people aren't able to do, especially as they get older. All kinds of factors cause agitation to the locus coeruleus, just low NAD levels, low mitochondrial function, poor sleep, too much stress, poor sleep habits. If you look at all of the biohacking, all of the longevity stuff, I mean, you really just go through naturopathic, Chinese medicine. There's a connection to taking care of the blue spot within all of it. It's fascinating. I almost want to write a book. Actually, I'm going to just on this blue spot. When you're doing the breath work, you're able to like totally quiet that blue spot down. And then back to the Bible, the original Aramaic Bible, Yeshua would talk about the veil of the temple, right? The temple meaning the unconscious, and the veil meaning the breath. And my friend that studied that Bible felt like that Jesus and his apostles were not sitting around eating bread and drinking wine, but they were doing breath work. And 45 years ago, his name's Michael Rice, by the way, and you can find his work at Why Again. Why Is This Happening to Me Again is the book, and it's whyagain.org, I think is his website. But Michael Rice has just been an amazing coach to me over the years. But he was doing breath work. He came up with this still point breathing, and I did it like 20 years ago, Jeff, and it was transformational back then. So he was onto this stuff, way before it's become so popular right now. But you're hitting two really important aspects of transformational work is you're removing the veil, you're allowing your body to access all this unconscious, and you're totally quieting down that fear. And so you're putting yourself in a position that if you have the right guide or sitter, and some people even use, different plant medicines or microdosing within the set and setting to just like really lower that default mode network and get you out of your ego and your mind and into your heart, you can do some powerful transformational work in this place.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I think you can. I think breath work and I think lowering CO2 and consequently, when you have more CO2, you're more acidic, you're more alkaline as you blow off CO2. So it's interesting, changing the pH, changing the CO2 in your blood will change the biochemistry in your brain, to your point, in the locus coeruleus. And it is interesting that can become a gateway. I think what it is it's removing an obstacle, right? Because the conversation so far, we've talked about the ego and kind of the default mode network, that there's kind of this obstacle to us actually getting past that. So when you're doing this breath work, people can say, well, why am I doing this breath work? And, you can do it in a yoga class. You can do it at home. You can do it by yourself. You can do it. There are apps for it, all kinds of stuff. But what you're really doing is you're actually sort of opening a door, stepping over a hurdle that was in your way to actually start to be able to access a greater sense of equanimity and a greater sense of access to the more spiritual, right? So it's very, very cool. And to your point, there are other techniques to do it, right? Other people do other things to lower that barrier.
Yeah.
It could be a walk in nature, or it could be, getting into the zone while they're doing something, playing music.
Whatever's giving you that deep sense of safety.
That's right.
Right?
That's right.
That's right. Deep sense of safety where you can go into a deep parasympathetic state.
That's it.
And that parasympathetic state is everything for this transformational, because it's, again, it kind of goes back to the locus coeruleus and being able to totally quiet that down. I have a spiritual master out in LA that I go see once in a while. And this guy is just like, one of the most enlightened people I've ever met. And I go work with him occasionally. And he just says, I'm the most relaxed person in the room. And he's just so deeply relaxed that he's so connected in the moment, not judging. And,
that's it. No judgment. He's safe. Yeah. He's not judging. There's love flowing. All he's feeling is love flowing through him, and gratitude, right? Love and gratitude. Yeah. Yeah, it's the best. It's the best. You know what happens when you step into that too, that I think is super cool, is you step into this realm of all possibilities, right? Which is really the quantum. And I think one of the things for the audience to listen to here is that when we're working out of our amygdala, when we're working out of this lack of safety, associated fear and anxiety and stress and other things, we're really caught in what I would characterize as binary thinking. It's like it has to be this or it has to be that. You said before earlier in the conversation, it's either this or that, right? And so to me, it's kind of a binary approach to life and thinking. If this doesn't happen, then that'll be bad. If this happens, then that'll be good. And yet when you go through the mechanisms, whatever they may be, to lower that barrier, to step over into the other side, well, what's over there? What's over there is basically stepping into more of a quantum field. So when you think about quantum computers, traditional computers are binary, right? They're analog in a sense, or they're digital, but they're ones or zeros. So they're binary. It's either a one or a zero. But in a quantum computer, in the quantum, all the possibilities exist simultaneously, right? Mm. And in the quantum, it goes from there's only one right answer to many things can be true at once. And so you're able to hold many truths simultaneously, right? And there's a sense of equanimity that comes in that. And there's a sense of not needing to judge anything. There's a sense of peace that comes from that. Now you're becoming what I call a quantum thinker. And sometimes I characterize myself as a quantum thinker in a binary world. And one of the things that I'm working on is how do you interface quantum thinking with people that are not quantum yet? I used to say they're binary, but now I realize we're all quantum. It's just that they're not quantum yet. Then how do you interface with those people there's no judgment. They're quantum too. It's not like I'm any better or you're any better. They're quantum too, but how do you interface between quantum and binary, right? So anyway, it's really fascinating space to work in. But once you get into it, it's the only place you want to live. I can tell you that.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. That's really fascinating about how those computers work. It's interesting what's going on with AI lately, and I know this is kind of changing the subject a little bit, but it's like we don't really know what's real and what's not. I mean, all the I love watching like UFO things like on Instagram and social media because I know that there's extraterrestrial life that's here. I've talked to people that have been involved with it, and these days, you don't know if the face on TV is even real. And it's an interesting future that we're sitting on with, lots of things
with AI.
Make us feel safe when we shouldn't probably feel safe.
Yeah, I think AI opens up a whole nother conversation around this. To me, it's it's an extension of the programming. Right. So if you're programming AI, you're still working on binary computers to do it. Once you start doing AI on quantum computing, this thing blows up to a completely different level, probably to a point where it takes on a form of consciousness as well. Right. But then the question is it a setting to this place that we're talking about where it's love and gratitude and, willing great things for everybody on the planet, or does it have its own agenda, right? And so that becomes, the rub for humanity. Do we become the slave or enslaved or encumbered, if you will, by a machine, or in its best information, is it benevolent, right? So, yeah.
Yeah. I would think that if something really went south with something like that, it would probably be somebody got in there and corrupted it to do what it wanted to do in order for them to take over it versus the machine, the whole thing with like the Terminator, right? Where the machine took on thinking that, needed to eradicate humans. Like, I don't know that I buy into that. I think that there would probably be somebody that would sneak in there and program it so that it could be, ruling itself. And I think that that's a real future that could happen if we're not careful. I was just seeing something about some giant barge that they're putting out in the middle of the ocean that is going to have all these supercomputers, that they're going to have all the AI. And I can just see all this military, UN like protecting it. And then, I mean, yeah, I see now why Elon Musk has been so vocal about how dangerous this can be.
Yeah. The danger of,
Well,
the danger of that's
we've
right.
really
And
gone
so,
from one subject to it's like,
yeah, but here's the interface, right? Is how do you continue to feel safe, right, in a world that's always been outside of our control and now is bringing to light another intelligence that's outside of our control too, quite honestly, right? You and I are not controlling that. We're not programming, right? So
yeah.
So how do you end up feeling safe? And I think these challenges have come to every generation. This is a unique one, but it's come to every generation. I always go back to what was it like to live when Genghis Khan was moving around, right? It's like, oh my gosh, but we're about to get wiped out.
Yeah.
So the question becomes, I think, we still live in, I think, some of the best times ever on the planet, if not the best times. And yet I think really, how do we feel safe? How do we feel loved? And then how do we transcend into the quantum? Because I think the best answers, what I've experienced is that the best answers for every situation for me come out of that quantum thinking, not out of binary thinking. Binary thinking only kind of backs me into a corner or makes me break through a wall of some sort. But quantum thinking enables me to create really, really positive, generative, loving, positive, good outcomes and solutions. So anyway, I think that'll always be true is my point.
Let's do like a little experience then. Like, let's say that one might be ruminating on this idea that AI is going to destroy the planet or eradicate human beings. Like, how could we reframe that and not judge it? And like, is there some like context to that is coming to you that you could kind of script?
Well, I think part of it's gonna come in the moment when things start to happen. Part of it also is in thinking about things that you might want to do to help protect yourself. I think there is going to be a movement, an anti-technology movement, an anti-AI movement that sweeps across the world, where people will move to areas where they don't have EMFs. They don't want it. They want to go back to being human and being in nature and, regenerative farming and all. Just leave us alone. We just want to be humans again, right? I think there'll be some element of that. Whether that's possible or not, I don't know, in a world that's full of AI. But I think that will be one response. I think, in the end, it's a little bit like man's search for meaning, right? I think in the end, it's how we interpret where we are. We can always control our reactions and how we respond to things. So we all live in kind of a cage at this point in time of some sort, right? Mm-hmm. So it's got a different feel or different flavor to it.
Ultimately,
I don't know. I think
everything ends, right? I mean, even when you look at the planet and like we're rotating around the sun, at some point, like Earth, it's not forever, right? I mean, you look at Mars. Yes. Mars at some point was like Earth. I mean, might take millions of years. There's just no way that humankind would even survive on Earth forever, right? I mean, could be hundreds of millions of years.
That's right.
So if it ends in a billion 10 years with AI, that was meant to be, and then there could, and then we're sitting here judging whether it's right or wrong. You have ant piles that somebody goes and puts ant killer all over, and you have a whole colony of ants that died. And if you're an ant, that would be the AI destruction, right? And it's just what happens in life. Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's elements of that. Everything is transient. And it makes me, quite honestly, incredibly grateful for the planet. Like, we talk about Elon Musk is talking about, well, we want to go colonize Mars. We want to go, interstellar, intergalactic. We want to, find other planets. If civilizations are going to rise in the Kardashev scale, in terms of their ability to master energy from just their planet to their solar system to their galaxy and on, and all the amazing things they can do, I think all that's very, very cool. But I have to tell you, it's given me such an appreciation for this planet, just to walk on this earth, feel the wind, get in the ocean, go for a ride, sweat, ride a mountain bike or whatever. I mean, we live on such a gem. I mean, it is an absolute gem. And to be able to be here now and enjoy it, what an absolute blessing. I mean, it puts the biggest smile on my face every day.
Yeah, Jeff, I recently did a post on my Instagram about the mother, right? And the Gaia, right? The mother, the creation, the energy of the mother. And I got to appreciate such a massive impact that the mother has in the ocean. I went to Nazaré in Portugal, right? This was just a couple of weeks ago I got back. And if you've ever watched the HBO special 100-Foot Wave with Garrett McNamara, I literally flew from Austin to Portugal with Garrett. It was the two of us traveling together. And he took me out to that break over by the lighthouse and towed me into a 40-foot wave. And I've got the video of it.
Wow.
The HBO guy, I wound up befriending him, and I did my cranial balloons on him. And he's like, yeah, okay, you can have the footage. And they talk about the mother out there, and Nazaré has this mother energy. They talk about the Madre, and there's a little statue of Mother Mary in this cave, in this, it was like a preacher or something had hibernated in this cave, and this particular statue was like very very valuable, and he hid it, and now they have it at the museums. But this idea of the mother and these waves, Jeffrey, are just massive. The appreciation for the amount of energy that this planet has and how small and tiny we are in comparison is incredible.
Yeah, no, it's an amazing planet to be on. I mean, that sounds like a kind of almost a funny statement. What other planet would we be on? But actually, as we explore space and we see what the James Webb is teaching us, and everything about cosmology, et cetera, I just become more and more appreciative of just how special it is to be here and what a gift it is. And I think it goes a long ways towards fueling my sense of respect for the planet, but also my gratitude in general for the ability to be human, to be here now in this context, and yet still, going forward in kind of this spiritual direction, which is kind of directing life and creating good things. So it's a super fun thing to do. Yeah.
Super fun.
Yeah. Well, it's an interesting conversation we've had here. So
we've covered some diverse terrain here with this conversation. It's given me a lot of things to reflect on. I really appreciate some of your views, and I think that it sounds like we're both on a very similar path. And
yeah, we are. You're on a similar trajectory for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, if we get a chance to get together in person, I'd enjoy that. Maybe we can do that. I can come by at some point, or you can come by, or however, one way or the other, we'll figure it out. So it'd be great.
Oh, it's got to happen. Yeah, the law of attraction.
Yeah.
It'll be like when you least expect it, it'll be like, Jeff. That happens to me sometimes.
Exactly.
At the airport, and it's like, oh my God.
Right? Yeah. Beautiful.
Yeah.
Well, good. Well, John, it's really been a pleasure. For the audience, I hope you've enjoyed this conversation. It's a little bit different than some of the conversations we've had, but I think it's such an important one. And for me, and I know for John also, it really loops back into the physical health. When you actually have this equanimity in your nervous system, quite honestly, it changes everything biologically. And it's such a massive asset to us. So appreciate you listening.
Sure. Yeah.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of the Gladden Longevity Podcast. If you would like more information on what we've discussed or other topics, please reference the show notes or go to gladdenlongevitypodcast.com. You can also find us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter by searching Gladden Longevity. If you've enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe to get future episodes delivered to you, and share our podcast or this episode with someone in your life that you may find benefit. Thank you for listening. We'll be back next week with another exciting episode. The Gladden Longevity Podcast is provided for informational purposes only. It does not constitute medical advice. This content is not intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always seek the advice of a physician or other qualified health provider with any questions you may have regarding a medical condition. The use of any information and materials linked to this podcast is at the listener's own risk.